investigation. So we need to get on to this to gather the facts. And if it is determined that, in fact, that these two were incapacitated, wounded, did not pose a threat, then it's pretty clear. It is a violation of the law of armed conflict.
General, is there any scenario where a double tap strike on shipwrecked survivors in the middle of the ocean is lawful?
It is if they still pose a threat. In other words, if they're pointing machine guns, if they're doing something that's going to harm some military service members or harm civilians, yes, you can do things of that nature. But in this case, I don't know the complete details. That's why we have to get on with an investigation. If, in fact, that was not the case, that they posed a threat, then, again, it is violation of the law of armed conflict.
Peter, we heard the White House press secretary frame this as Admiral Bradley's call, and here was Secretary Hegseth last night posting, Admiral Mitch Bradley is an American hero, a true professional, and has my 100% support. I stand by him and the combat decisions he has made on the September 2nd mission and all others since. Peter, is Admiral Bradley now being scapegoated by the White House?
Well, there's certainly a fear that you hear from national security people, from military people who admire the admiral and worry that he is being hung out to dry for decision-making and policy-making by Secretary Hegseth and the administration. Remember, it's not even just the second strike that's at issue. The first strike is still at issue for a lot of people. A lot of lawyers would say even the first strike goes beyond the laws of war because these boats are not military targets in a conventional sense. The administration is arguing that they constitute enemy combatants because the drug war is so dangerous to the United States, but they are civilians, and typically you do not have the authority to bomb civilians who do not pose a direct immediate threat. These people weren't actually posing a direct immediate threat, even if the drugs they were carrying, if they were in fact carrying drugs, might in the long term present a threat to the country. So there's a lot of issues to be sorted out here, and we haven't heard from the Pentagon what is legal rationalization. They have not given out the memos that they use to justify these strikes in the first place. They have not given us any kind of timeline on a lot of these decisions and who made what when. Our reporting at the Times suggests that Hegseth did not give a specific order in this specific case for a specific second strike. But as you say, a lot of people are worrying that that's just a way of downgrading the responsibility to the admiral rather than the administration.
And so, David, what do we know about Admiral Bradley and his background? Should he have known what he can and can't do?
He's got an extraordinary military pedigree. He grew up in Texas, attended the U.S. Naval Academy, became a Navy SEAL. And there's nothing more difficult in the American military than to become a Navy SEAL. He was one of the first U.S. Soldiers to be on the ground in Afghanistan after 9/11, and then he's commanded these elite special forces units since then. The key thing is when this order was given, and this is a difference, and Peter just mentioned the Times reporting. The original Washington Post reporting was that Hegseth gave some sort of broad order that there be no survivors. One source told the Post, kill all of them, is what Hegseth said beforehand. The question is whether I think that issue was ordered, and we're going to see more. And the question is the committees on the Hill are asking for videos of the strike, any written orders that Hegseth gave, and that's going to be the key here, is seeing what documentation is there, what did the video show. Hegseth was watching the live video as well as the first and second strikes were carried out. That's been reported. That is an important detail too. If he was at least a participant in both that first and second strike, that seems like an important piece to point out. General, what are the key questions you would have for Admiral Bradley if he does face questions before lawmakers?
Yeah, I think other things that are key here that we haven't discussed is the lawyers. Every single commander has a lawyer that's telling them whether or not, yes, you can do these things, no, you can't. If you do these things, here are the risks. And so I'm interested in knowing, what did the lawyers say down the command chain all the way to the teams that executed the strike? So that's the first thing. The second thing is the teams that conducted the strike. what orders were they given, because they know right from wrong, in whether or not that they're going to violate a rule or not. And so I'm interested to know, what did they go through in terms of their planning process, and whether or not they fully understood that these two were incapacitated.
Laura, we know.
Joining us now, Democratic Senator Mark Kelly of Arizona. He, of course, was one of the lawmakers in that video to service members and is now being investigated by the Defense Department. He's also a member of the Armed Services Committee and served as a captain in the U.S. Navy. Senator, it's good to have you on the show. We'll begin with what we know so far from the Washington Post on the double tap strike. Is this what you were talking about?
Mika, this is the kind of thing we were talking about. We were certainly concerned when you put somebody in charge of the Department of Defense who rises to a level of incompetence that I don't think we have seen in any government department. I mean, set aside the Secretary or the Department of Defense for a second. A guy who should have never been in this job, and you combine that with a president who talks about killing people, shooting protesters in the legs, who in 2016 said that the military would not refuse his orders even if they were illegal. So you put these two guys, in charge of, operations, and we were really, really concerned that something like this could happen. So we put out the video. Donald Trump's response to that was that we should be hanged, executed, for just saying to members of the military that they should follow the law. And, now, unfortunately, because of Pete Hegseth, especially because of his incompetence, members of the military are going to have to deal with this. This is a guy that talks about hunting and killing the enemy, about lethality, about warrior ethos, not about, well, you said what he said about rules of engagement, stupid rules of engagement. Rules of engagement are what the U.S. military lives by. This stuff is not new. I mean, the Geneva Conventions, specify how we have to treat survivors. So the U.S. Navy got into this situation because of the incompetence of Pete Hegseth.
Senator, good morning. You're a decorated Navy pilot. I know you have reverence for the United States Navy, for Navy SEAL teams like the one that operated on September 2nd. I'm curious, with all we know now, what you've heard from the White House, even yesterday, what you've heard from Defense Secretary Hegseth, given your experience, your expert eye, what do you see here in this incident?
Well, I see something that seems very obviously not consistent with the laws of armed conflict, with the manual of war that DOD has published and what we've operated under. So I'm really concerned, and we have to have an investigation. We've got to get all the details. I don't put a tremendous amount of trust in this administration to give us all the information. But we do know from Pete Hegseth's own words, he said he was there, he was watching it live. So that means he is the senior most member of a team who is in the operational chain of command. He's responsible. And I find it really disturbing that a guy who leads the Department of Defense immediately starts to blame others.
Senator, so Secretary Hegseth, he seems to think his job involves just swaggering around, basically. He calls himself the Secretary of War. He's not the Secretary of Defense. He's the Secretary of War. He talks this sort of macho lexicon. But we kind of knew this about him, didn't we? Wasn't this known before he was confirmed?
Absolutely.
So what are you hearing from or getting from your Republican colleagues in the Senate who voted to confirm this man, knowing who he was?
Well, generally, people do not like to admit when they're wrong, especially politicians, especially ones that lack a spine to stand up to anybody.
What we're witnessing here is more and more military folks from all the branches coming out and challenging Pete Hegseth, what he did from a moral, from a strategic, and from a legal perspective, because it violates all three, right? like, I understand maybe it's romantic of me to think that the military of a country, whether it's the United States or another country that's perceived as a good guy, should be moral. Maybe that's naive of me, but call me naive. I think that in addition to what's technically allowed, there's a moral consideration. And I think that these acts in general are way out of proportion, even if what they're claiming these boats are, like they're drug boats or whatever, even if that's true, I don't think it justifies their action. But I've seen no proof that it is true. These could be fishermen. They're being chosen randomly to serve a political narrative for the Trump administration. But it's a moral act when people are down and out, when you've beat somebody in a fight, that you don't, go and finish them off, quote unquote. There's a reason why in combat sports, you don't just keep hitting the guy once you've beaten him, right? Like, you know what I mean? Like, there's these things like that. And so from that, also from the legal perspective, even if these initial hits were legal, even if, there comes a point even in war where actions go from legal to illegal. That even in the context of battle, there are certain things you're allowed to do and certain things you're not allowed to do. And one of those things is you're not allowed to take out people that are effectively now prisoners or should be treated as such. And these people should have been. But it's also tactical too, because the more and more that the United States does this, the more and more allies move away from them. Allies now have to say, not only do we disagree with this, are we going to get embroiled in war crimes because we're associating with this chain of command? And also, as noted, it breaks the morale of the millions of people that serve and have served and will serve. If they think their government is doing evil, I don't think that does them justice as they serve their country.